The science of psychology. This is the introduction to the introduction of psychology. What is psychological science? This is the study through research of mind, brain, and behavior. Here, mind refers to mental activity. Mental activity results from biological processes within the brain, and behavior describes the totality of observable human or animal actions. Critical thinking plays an important role in psychology. And what is it? It is systematically questioning and evaluating information using well-supported evidence. A component of this is amiable skepticism. It combines openness with wariness. You remain open to new evidence, but you evaluate it. You weigh the facts before you decide what to believe. And just because something aligns with your beliefs does not mean that it is good evidence. Psychological research is often in the news because the findings are intriguing and relevant to people's lives. These reports can be distorted or based on bad studies. They do create great headlines, though. It seems one can find evidence to support about anything when you search the internet. Critical thinking skills can help one to find the truth and read through sensational headlines. Psychologists use critical thinking to evaluate provocative research questions. Here, the author cautions against believing the hype about brain training. Some use this in assessing present and potential employees. The study really only showed that people were just training at a specific task and got better at that task. This may not generalize to other tasks. Psychological science helps us understand biased or inaccurate thinking, and critical thinking is the tool that facilitates avoiding erroneous conclusions. Examples of this are ignoring evidence. This is an example of confirmation bias. People tend to like evidence that agrees with their beliefs and avoid evidence that does not. This is certainly true for both sides of the political spectrum, as we see quite often. Another example is seeing relationships that do not exist. This is an example of correlation. Here's a slide as an example of a correlation. Shows a rise in global average temperature and an increase in the number of pirates. Technically, this shows a relation to a rise in temperature to the number of pirates, but that is ridiculous. Baseball and basketball are good examples where this happens. In baseball, when they step up to the plate, they tend to have a little set of actions that they have to repeat because over time they notice that when they did those things, they did well in their sport. So it's also true in basketball when players step up to the line for free throw shooting. They each have their own unique little variations of throwing a free throw. Another example is accepting after-the-fact explanations. This is referred to as hindsight bias. People are great at explaining how something happened, but cannot predict well. An example of this are school shootings. The warning signs were all there, but no one noticed. Another example is taking mental shortcuts. This is called heuristics. An example of this is the availability heuristic. For example, after seeing news reports about a certain crime leads people to exaggerate the rate at which those crimes occur. Here's that graph again with the rise in temperature and number of pirates. Failing to see our own inadequacies. Why are people unaware of their weaknesses? People credit their qualities when successful, and they blame external sources for their shortcomings. This is evident in those talent contest shows on television. How can they not know how terrible they are at singing? A German word captures this perfectly. It's called Fremdschämen. An example of this is the television show The Office, where the main character has no idea how terrible his words and actions are, and this is what creates the humor. It's when one experiences embarrassment on someone else who is not embarrassed. In studies of college students, researchers Dunning and Kruger found that people with the lowest grades rate their mastery of the academic skills much higher than evidenced by their performance. If one does not know, how will they ever know? People that are unaware of their failings are not likely to fix those failings. Research has shown that teaching a person a task can help that person more accurately judge themselves in that task. This implies that people need help in identifying their weaknesses. Why are people so inaccurate in the first place? Well, they generally start with extremely positive views about their own abilities. Most people believe they are better than average in many things in their lives. What are the scientific foundations of psychology? Psychology originated in philosophy. Chinese philosophers like Confucius and scientists speculated about human behavior throughout history. In the 1800s in Europe, psychology emerged as a scientific discipline. Many psychological questions have a very long history. Ancient Greek philosophers Aristotle and Plato debated to what an individual's psychological makeup is attributable to. Are characteristics biologically innate, or are they acquired through education, experience, and culture? Culture is a set of beliefs, values, rules, and customs that exist within a group of people who share a common language and environment. What classic debate were Aristotle and Plato having? The classic nature versus nurture debate. The arguments concerning whether psychological characteristics are biologically innate or acquired through education, experience, and culture. The view today is that nature and nurture influence each other and are inseparable. Another question that has a long history is the mind-body problem. This is a fundamental psychological issue. Are mind and body separate and distinct, or is the mind simply a physical brain's subjective experience? Early scholars believe the mind is entirely separate from and in control of the body. This agreed with the Christian views of the time and facilitates the presence of the soul. In the 1500s, Leonardo da Vinci challenged this doctrine. His medical dissections led him to believe the role of the brain in terms of controlling the body. In the 1600s, René Descartes suggested that the body and the mind were indeed separate, but that some mental functions resulted from bodily functions, separate but intertwined. Memory and imagination comes from bodily function, and action occurs because of the mind. Modern psychologists reject this dualism. The mind arises as a result of brain activity. Experimental psychology initially focused on the structure, not the function, of mental activity. In the early 1800s, John Stuart Mill argued psychology should be a science of observation and of experimentation. In 1879, Wilhelm Wundt established the first psychological laboratory. Wundt realized that psychological processes, the products of psychological actions in the brain, take time to occur. Therefore, he used a method developed earlier called reaction time to assess how quickly people can respond to events. Laboratories were established throughout Europe, Canada, and the United States at the time. An important aspect is called introspection. This is a systematic examination of subjective mental experiences that requires people to inspect and report on the content of their thoughts. It assesses how each individual personally experiences an event. Here's a picture of Wilhelm Wundt. Looks about right for 1800s. All right. And Edward Titchener pioneered a school of thought that became known as structuralism. Structuralism is an approach to psychology based on the idea that conscious experience can be broken down into its basic underlying components. It's used introspection heavily to study consciousness. There are problems with introspection, however. Experience is subjective. Each person's experience of the same thing will be different. Each person might deploy introspection a little bit differently than another person. Also, reporting of an experience changes the experience. Another fellow came along, his name is William James, and in 1890 he published the first major overview of psychology. Many of his ideas have passed the test of time. In theorizing about how the mind works, he moved psychology beyond structuralism and into functionalism. This William James, he was a critic of structuralism. He left medicine to teach physiology at Harvard. He supported women breaking into male-dominated sciences and trained Mary Whiton Calkins. Mary Whiton Calkins was the first woman to set up a psychological laboratory and was the first female president of the American Psychological Association. Here's a picture of her. Functionalism. This is an approach to psychology concerned with the adaptive purpose or function of mind and behavior. A component of this is coined the stream of consciousness. This is a phrase coined by William James to describe each person's continuous series of ever-changing thoughts. The mind developed over the course of human evolution because it is useful for preserving life. The mind helps humans adapt to environmental demands. Think of this in terms of making plans. Humans can make plans to adapt to things that are going on in their environment. Functionalism. As earlier stated, is an approach to psychology concerned with the adaptive purpose or function of mind and behavior. Here's that